Good afternoon, everybody. As people begin to trickle in, we are going to kick off this webinar with our video that or U of T School of Cities and City Building TMU created to frame the issues and set up the discussion that this is part of our week-long conversation. And we'll see you in a few minutes.
Cities across Canada are looking for smart solutions to our housing affordability crisis. Hiding in plain sight is a generational opportunity to add missing middle housing to our residential neighborhoods as an alternative to condo buildings, or relying on environmentally harmful urban sprawl to provide large family homes. Potentially the fastest, least disruptive, and most cost-effective type of missing middle housing is at the smaller scale, adding one or more units to an existing single-family house and its yard. These types of homes are becoming more familiar in our neighborhoods. Garden suites, laneway homes, adding suites within the house, or dividing a house into multiple units. Our residential neighborhoods, made up mostly of single-family houses, occupy the majority of land in our city regions, offering great capacity to add new housing supply quickly to areas where we already have roads, transit, schools and health clinics, many other services and local businesses, and walkable communities. A recent study by the Urban Land Institute estimates that adding one unit to 15% of houses in Toronto would be equal to adding at least 100 condo towers. The question is, can this type of housing supply help with affordability and equity? Many municipalities are already rolling out these programs, including Toronto, but early evidence indicates that these programs are not generating affordable housing, but rather homes that are at market rate, great for more housing supply, but not necessarily for affordability. In some cities, where these programs have been in place for a few years now, the uptake by homeowners has been disappointingly low, even at market rate. House conversions and laneway houses are costly, and the process is onerous to navigate. So how can we design better programs and policies to deliver affordable units? For instance, can we reduce the costs of construction with, well, less construction? Instead of completely gutting houses and rebuilding them, can we develop pre-approved plans to add suites to the existing dwelling or replicable backyard homes and scale a renovation revolution? Can we create a municipal one-stop shop that provides everything the homeowner needs, from a local labor pool to innovative financial tools and a barrier-free process? Can the National Housing Strategy help roll out pilot projects in Canadian cities to encourage uptake and test new programs that benefit homeowners while yielding affordable units? Can we ensure that these programs are equitable and truly inclusive? Join the School of Cities, City Building TMU, and ULI Toronto for a 4-part webinar series to explore these and other solutions to create an affordable renovation revolution. Learn more and sign up for the series at affordablemissingmiddle.ca.
Once again, good afternoon, everybody. And obviously, you did sign up for the series, and that's why you're here today. My name is Richard Joy, Executive Director of ULI Toronto, and welcome to day 2 of this week-long series that has been organized and curated by the U of T School of Cities and City Building TMU. ULI is proud to be a co-host of this series on our platform and attract many of our members as well as the constituencies of both universities. Before we get into today's session, as always, we begin with a land acknowledgement. As a Toronto region-based organizations, we acknowledge that the land that we are meeting on virtually is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, Haudenosaunee, the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nation, Inuit, and Métis people. We acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. We are all treaty people. Many of us have come here as settlers, immigrants, and newcomers in this generation or generations past. ULI stands in solidarity with Indigenous communities demanding action and accountability for the ongoing legacy of the residential school system. We'd also like to acknowledge and honor those who've come here involuntarily, particularly descendants from those who were brought here through enslavement. To better understand the meaning behind this land acknowledgement, we recommend 4 chat programs that we've uploaded to YouTube, and these links will be made available on the chat. It's now my pleasure to introduce Karen Chappell, the Director of the School of Cities at UT and Professor of Geography and Planning at that university, who's going to be our moderator for this afternoon. Bios for all our speakers will be in the chat, so we are sort of economizing of time by not reading out long bios. But before I hand over to Karen, I want to make sure that our audience knows that ULI is a nonpartisan organization, and we do not advocate on public policy pro or con. But we do frequently take a look at public policy landscape, in the context of advancing our global mission. I'll be back toward the end of this program to help facilitate audience Q&As if we have time. So that's your invitation to submit them. And please also look to upvote those questions that are submitted, even if you don't yourself submit one. That'll help us prioritize the most interesting questions to our audience. And with that, Professor Chappell, I'll invite you to take over.
Thanks so much, Richard. So welcome back. Yesterday, Professor Michael Piper's panel showed us how to do renovations cheaply and with good design. But to get to affordable missing middle, we need real scale. And there's still many barriers to implementation at a large scale. Barriers baked into the zoning bylaws, the building codes, and many other standards we have created. So we need to build up the industry to get scale and get to affordability, but we need to break down the barriers before we can build the industry. And that's what this panel is about. With that, I want to introduce our panel. We're going to be starting with Eli Spivak, which is kind of appropriate because Eli was one of the pioneers of the accessory dwellings movement, for founding the accessorydwellings.org website, and with over 20 years of experience in Oregon developing affordable housing communities in the missing little. Then we'll go to Denise Pinkston, who's founder and president of the Casita Coalition, and really the brains behind California's legislative revolution for ADUs in the missing middle. Then we go to Leith Moore. Leith is co-founder of Our House Solutions, which is leading the way in this region in terms of prefab, mass timber, sustainable housing solutions. And then we'll wrap up with Bindu Shah, who's an architect and urban planner with 20 years of experience in throughout Canada, Ontario, and Alberta, currently the strategic lead for planning at the town of Caledon. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Eli.
Second. Hello, everyone. I'm going to share my screen now. There we go. And hopefully you can see that. Thank you so much for including me in this presentation. It's going to be a treat to talk to you for just a few minutes here. My hope is that I can share some tricks to allow a greater variety and more homes in your neighborhoods. Also some tricks on how you can actually get them to get built, and some lessons from where I live in Portland, Oregon, where we've been experimenting with this for a couple of decades. So I'm a developer, a general contractor, a planning commissioner, a zoning wonk, and a bit of a rabble rouser. So some of the ideas I might throw in might not be appropriate for Toronto, but I'll just toss them out there and see if anything sticks. And in Portland, where I live, we're known as being a progressive city for land use planning, but our zoning map looks like a lot of residential single-family neighborhood. Over 44% of our city is zoned that way. And it's not that different from your zoning, which is also predominantly single-family residential. And we've learned over the years that this causes builders to construct really large single-family homes, and that's about it, kind of a monocrop. Whereas our demographics have been shifting over the years. I used to have a little, year-by-year change graphic, but 30% of households are now single people living alone. In Oregon, almost 2/3 of households are 1 or 2 people. Yet more than 85% of our housing stock is 2+ bedrooms, and that's largely driven by our single family zoning that allows one house per minimum lot size lot. I come to this coming from a climate perspective also. Oregon did some studies of this a couple decades ago showing that 80% of the carbon footprint of a house scales directly with how large the volume of that house is, much more so than the embodied energy and the stuff to build the house, which means if you build a smaller home, you reduce the carbon footprint because all that energy into heating and cooling the home is reduced accordingly. And of course, affordability is a reason too. Smaller homes just cost less in the market. So we've really gone on a path of re-legalizing historic housing types. So that could be cottage clusters up here. It could be row houses. I grew up in Washington, D.C., a row house city. It could be a tiny home. It could be bringing back the boarding house. And on the bottom right, that's Thomas Jefferson's ADU he lived in with his family before they built Monticello, a tradition that goes back centuries in North America. So we'll start off with the easy stuff, relatively speaking, accessory dwelling units, then go bigger with plexes, then go smaller to even less expensive than ADU options, tiny homes and shared homes, and then look at maybe some rezoning, which is what our city has to do next. So start with the ADU. We're really re-legalizing a historic housing type. And the trick to doing this is to let every version of an ADU be allowed, internal, detached, every lot's different, second floor, basement, all of those options, so it can fit discreetly into an existing neighborhood. And then do things like Portland did since 1996, allow them by right on every lot in the city by clear and objective standards, no land use process needed, allow them citywide, allow each of those housing types, don't have any owner occupancy requirements on it, don't require extra parking. And then even if you do all those things, which we did in 1996, we still only saw like 20 or 30 of them a year. Then we waived some permit fees. We recognize that most people who build ADUs are amateurs. They don't know what development is. So we provided some nice literature, a little hand-holding from the city. And we had other cities around us legalize them too. And then the numbers shot up to over 1 ADU per day for several years. And now it's sort of plateaued at about 300 or so a year in our market. Other cities have done the same thing as us. And now in the United States, increasingly entire states require every city to allow an ADU. So there are now 8 states in the country where ADUs have to be allowed, and maybe more coming. And then some places in the country, you allow 2 ADUs per lot. Vancouver, BC was a leader on this. Now every city in California has to allow 2 ADUs. It's basically a triplex state. But we should go beyond ADUs. We should look at small plexes and cottage clusters. Once again, things that have been in our neighborhoods for ages, but single family zoning made them illegal, oftentimes starting in the 1950s and 1960s. This is a project Portland did called the Residential Infill Project that acknowledged that people on a single family lot were building these really huge homes, like 3,000, 4,000 square feet, because they're allowed to. They actually could have built them much larger than that. Our project shrunk the size of a home you could build to 2,500 square feet for a 1-plex, but then let you earn it back incrementally if you build more units. So first, to show you the menu of options you now have available to you: a house with an ADU, a duplex, a triplex, a house with 2 ADUs, a duplex with an ADU, a 4-plex. Any of those are available on any lot in the city. And now this is going to be a slide, but it's important to understand how we did it, because how matters. For a 2,500 square foot house, you can do a 1-plex. If you want to build 2 units, whether it's a house and an ADU or a duplex, then you have 3,000 square feet to play with. So maybe it's two 1,500 square foot homes, or maybe it's a full-size house with an ADU. If you have 3 units, then you have 3,500 square feet to play with, and 4 units, you have 4,000 square feet to play with. So at each level of density, you get more FAR. And we did that because we wanted to incentivize people to actually build these additional housing types. This was accompanied by squishing down the envelope that you could build in. And the ultimate result is you don't really change the residual land value of the property much at all. And it meant that it didn't increase displacement any more than it was happening anyway. We allowed this citywide. And then after Portland adopted it, the state of Oregon copied us. And now every city in the state of Oregon has to allow all these housing types plus cottage clusters. So this happened just a few years ago, and there's been always that, well, we should study what happens out of this. And finally, we have some data. So this is like off the shelf. Recently, I called up a planner and said, what's happening? And this left side of the slide are the types of housing that were legal before RIP: houses, ADUs, a mixture, maybe both on the same lot. And the right side are the things that are newly allowed thanks to RIP: the triplexes, of fourplexes. And we're seeing those get developed. All this data on both sides was all developed in a 1-year period. Oopsie. And this is where it gets really interesting for demographics, because we used to be getting a monocrop of single family homes. Then ADUs became popular and we got big homes and little homes. And now with this range of housing types, we're getting lots of mid-sized homes, like 1,000, 1,200 square feet, 1,500 square foot homes. They were too small to build before or too large to be an ADU. And now we're getting a unit mix that's larger more units overall in a year. And also the homes are more matching the demographics of the people who actually live in our city. So that's encouraging, but it's not enough housing. You're going to get some additional homes this way, but maybe not enough. So we looked at other options as well. One of them is to go smaller than a project that specifically allowed the least expensive housing to be legal once again. So one of those is group housing. We got rid of the definition of household. We allowed second kitchens. We made it easier to do SROs in more zones, single room occupancies. We also legalized shelters and allowed them larger and by right in more parts of the city, inside ones, and also with strict regulations outside shelters. And we legalized tiny homes, 1 per lot, a home on a wheel that you can now locate on any residential lot in Portland. They were already doing it, but it was all below the radar screen. Now it's up above board. The other thing that you go further with is zoning, because we still have, as you saw, our zoning map where it's mostly yellow, single family zoning. Look back to the zoning map here. The one on the left is our zoning in Portland, 1923, where a lot of the city was blue. That's multifamily. And that same area today is mostly yellow. It's time for us to upzone some of our close-in neighborhoods and halos around our commercial districts so that you can have more multifamily apartments there. Those are done by professionals. It's wood frame construction, no elevator involved. It's the least expensive housing type to build, and it scales in a way that single family homeowners doing ADUs doesn't scale. There's a strong argument for climate reasons, for affordability reasons, and if you're going to displace people, the displacement should happen to those who are least vulnerable and most able to move somewhere else, which happens to be in some of your more affluent neighborhoods. So rezoning is going to be politically fraught, but probably what we need to do to increase our density. And here's how to do it. You just take your existing zoning code, multi-dwelling zones, and apply it in areas that are outside of where you're doing podium large concrete construction. It can sort of be a step down zoning to your residential neighborhoods. Last ideas. One is require that all the housing you need be creatable through a by right process. If you have to go through a design review, then someone might not ever get through the design review. I wouldn't count that housing as a housing you can actually achieve. In Oregon, every city can only count towards its housing goals, housing that can be done through a clear and objective process. Drop parking mandates if you still have them. That drives up the cost of housing, and it's housing for cars, not for people. Legalize the least cost housing types we shared here. And one idea we did, because faith communities are disposing of property left and right in our community, was to create a special zoning code project to upzone some of those faith-owned properties and make them available for affordable housing with some spot zoning in partnership with the communities and with local nonprofits. And with that, I'm done. And I'm going to turn over the baton to Denise Pinkston. Take it away. I'll stop sharing my screen.
Hi, everybody. I'm tech challenged, so I'm going to have you all advance my slides. I'm Denise Pinkston, sitting in Berkeley, California, on a property surrounded by 3 or 4 ADUs owned by my neighbors. And we are just really the part of California's ADU revolution, which I'm going to talk about today at a kind of high level, now that Eli's shown us how these things work in the weeds. Next slide. So what California did that was unusual is we changed state housing law incrementally in really powerful by right moves, following a lot of what we learned from Karen Chappell and Eli in Oregon, with the first law that said ADUs have to be allowed by building permit only or by right in any existing structure, whether it's a garage or a pool house or a cabana, limited parking, limited fees. And overnight, every one of California's 450 cities and 58 counties had to comply with this state law change. And our state housing department of community development issued a guidance memo that began cities on their own ADU journeys to do better innovations and better practices. We followed that with a series of cleanup laws that said homeowners associations can't prohibit them, can't require owner occupancy for a period of time, no impact fees, allow 2 ADUs, on each single family and more in multifamily. And most people ignore this bit, but you can increase density by 20% in any multifamily building in unused spaces or yard areas, which has actually been a huge source of ADUs in more recent years. And we got money in the state budget because financing has been a problem, and we needed to get the state engaged in promoting good financing practices. And that was followed with additional zoning state laws, which aren't working as well yet as the ADU laws. But it's a journey, to Eli's point, that you start somewhere. We started with ADUs, and then you expand out to these other housing types. Next slide. So I'm going to go kind of quickly through these, the sort of how-tos. So how did we get this done? We started with a small bill. If the building is already there, let it be converted to housing in a housing crisis. We also found arguments that resonated with most people, not just the yes to housing people or the acolytes, but people who had no idea that this was a thing and were worried about change. And our arguments went like this: local control begins at home. A home cannot be a fixed box for a nuclear family ideal from the 1950s. Our home has to adapt to our blended, mended, extended, and changing families in a culture where, in many cities in the world, we value diversity, we value tolerance, we value privacy. And what a family chooses to do in their own home is their own business, including whether they want to share the garage with their mom or their teenage kids when they come home from college because they can't afford to live in the community elsewhere. And this allows lifestyle and family size flexibility that reflects today's realities, not an ideal that is outdated and burdening our families. And then we built a really big coalition. Next slide. So this is the contents of the 2016 bill. I'm not going to go into all of these details, but again, the idea was to just camel's nose under the tent in the zoning conversation, make these sort of minimal sounding changes that were actually fairly big and impactful. And a lot of the arguments for these are very much modeled on what was done in Oregon. Next slide. Biggest idea was to kind of pivot the framing around this, which was local control begins at home, not at City Hall. You don't need neighbor permission for how many kids you have, how many dogs you have, how many cars you have. You shouldn't need your neighbor's permission to decide to share your property with people who need a place to live during a crisis. People shouldn't have a lifestyle veto over who lives in your house, how many times you flush the toilet a day, or how many showers you take. Government should not invade your privacy. They should stay out of your bedroom, and they should stay out of who lives where on your property. So in California, which is a politically very diverse state, we needed arguments that appealed to a huge geography with a wide range of place types and belief systems. So we kind of went back to these very old themes in American history around, the bundle of rights you get as a property owner. And really, the argument was the state has to allow ADUs so family homes can address these family needs, and we don't empower neighbors to tell other people how to live their lives. Next slide. The other big argument was only state action creates a safe, uniform path to legal ADUs, because otherwise people just do it. And Jake Wegman's one of Karen's students who found that half of housing produced in a California community over a period of time was illegal, primarily ADUs, because they just had to house family members in an informal way, and they had no path to make it safe or legal. Next slide. And kids died in these units. So it was a big deal for the state to get in this space and make it legal, even if cities didn't like revoking of their local control. Next slide. And then we created a huge support coalition. And a lot of my personal time in putting this law together and lobbying was to find as many people who might buy this narrative as I could. Cities, bigger cities, tended to be planning advocates, business organizations, environmentalists and infill advocates, senior advocates, nonprofit builders, unions, equity and environmental justice advocates, and the governor. And it was kind of a small idea. Remember, this is just in an existing structure. Let an existing structure be converted to housing. So we were able to build this very big coalition around kind of a small idea, and then incrementally adopt new legislation after that. For many folks, this was their first time supporting a housing bill or the same bill. Next slide. And The results were almost instantaneous and shockingly successful. Within 4 or 5 years, we're moving past 63,000 ADUs permitted from 2018 to 2022. Uniform standards across the state, ADUs in every part of California, all types of communities, urban, rural, infill, wealthy, not so wealthy. And it's now moving to the point where ADUs are almost 15 to 20% of all housing types permitted in a large number of areas of the state. This scaled action enabled a $6 billion industry by our estimates, including more activity going through the Home Depot or through your local contractor. Lots of architects and builders who were looking at shutdowns during the pandemic saw an uptick in their work in the ADU space. And it's popular. 73% of homeowners approve of ADUs in their neighborhoods based on a Zillow survey. Next slide. So I'm going to move through these next ones quickly, but as a result of scaled action, every week there's an article in the newspaper about ADUs in California. Next slide. The state law has created massive explosion in industry innovation and investment by private companies who are starting and trying to figure out how to get more of these units built more widely in every backyard at a lower price point. And so the market's doing what it's supposed to do now that every backyard is available to them as a building site that cannot be denied through design review. Next slide. And this vision is spreading, not just because of California's work. Karen and Eli were really the founders of the space, but it's catching on because it works. Next slide. We're also starting, like Eli said, expand out the policy from beyond ADUs to smaller tiny homes and home sharing all the way up through cottage plexes. And I think the sort of yes to housing group that we represent needs to expand our talking points to include all of this range of activities. So we're starting to do that now in California. Next slide. But zoning and getting rid of the zoning barriers are only the first barriers. And what we find here is that once you get the zoning out of the way, there are still many, many barriers to ADU development and by extension, these other housing forms. Primarily financial barriers. It still remains expensive. It's hard to get financing. A lot of people don't understand it still, or they didn't when this survey was done. They're not aware of it. They're suspect of government. They don't like dealing with permits or being landlords or developers. So a lot of work to be done in the finance space, but also general public awareness. Next slide. So this is what Casita Coalition is working in. We've done a bunch of work in the US and in California on expanding options for ADU finance. We are working on other second-gen barriers like communications through social media. Next slide. We are talking to newspapers and others, people like you, about this so that it becomes normalized, not a weird, scary thing. Next slide. We are doing blogs every couple of weeks on some important topic so that the professional community continues to become more expert and more facile in discussing this. Next slide. We're capturing human stories, people who built an ADU, how it helped them and their families, how it helped them lower their mortgage payments. And these human stories are really important to normalize these policy changes and allow people to see that it's helping, not hurting. Next slide. Documenting successes so homeowners know they can get to the end of the day. We have a website that shows images of completed ADUs and describes the journey that each homeowner went through. Next slide. We do homeowner education fairs, and this has been a really important tactic in a lot of cities as well, where people just want to kick the tires before they make a big life decision. Next slide. Also keeping the professional community expert, whether you work in a city, a county, the state, or you're a builder, helping explain the complexities and the details, as Eli said, we're all zoning wonks at heart, to our colleagues is really important. So big topics for professional development and government innovation is something that matters. And so we've been doing best practice guidebooks on a lot of these important topics. Next slide. As I mentioned, we need coaching, so we do industry mixers. Next slide. Other peer-to-peer education through webinars. Next slide. We talk to people outside the state to find out what they're up to and make sure we're following best practices and we're teaching them what we're doing so the whole industry can expand simultaneously to get to scale, not just at a state level, but at a national level. Next slide. This year, we're going to have our first in-person small homes convening, where we hope it will be an annual event where groups like all of you will get together and talk with people from all over the US and maybe also Canada about what we're doing so we can all get better and faster, quicker. Next slide. And so, join us. If you join, you can become a member of Casita. You can just follow us on social media and read our blog posts. But thanks very much for listening today. And I'm handing off now to Leith Moore.
Good afternoon, everybody. I am Leith. So Missing Middle is essentially about building small. And our house is a company that's been created and dedicated to building small. I read E.F. Schumacher back in uni, and he wrote this fascinating book in the 70s called Small is Beautiful, Economics as If People Mattered. So if you have time this coming weekend, I heartily recommend you dig it out, change your life. Next slide, please. Our house builds everything from ADUs to 6, 8, and 10-story mid-rise multifamily housing. Next slide. So we are in the Toronto market trying to create repeatable products within this missing middle category. Next slide. We also happen to build sustainably, passive house principles, off gas, geothermal where we can. Next slide. Lots of wood, lots of alternate solutions. We'll talk about code in a second. Next slide. We build market rental. This is my lovely 6-story pilot. Next slide. Next slide. Keep going. We're circulating all of these, so you'll get to see them. And then we're also working on self-solving housing needs with ADUs, intergenerational housing, garden suites, etc. Next slide. Next slide. I'm going to talk about this. We'll stop here. So I think that, I've been in this business for over 40 years, and for me, it's been a kind of a journey of paddling upstream, portaging around problems, struggling to try and find a way to build small. It's not called missing middle because we lack policy. It's called missing middle because we, if anything, have had too much policy, but not enough on the ground reality to make it happen. And two factors in that are regulatory framework and our lack of building capability. I want to say today, for a change, I've spoken to folks in Toronto on one panel or another over the last few years. I actually think we're getting there, and we might even be almost there. The policy scarring that we all know gets put in place because it's a response to things that happen we don't like, that we wish didn't happen. So how do we resolve it? We put another policy in to stop it from happening. That's led to almost like a glacial scale of barriers to building small. And missing middle has been suffering the death of 1,000 cuts for many years. It's like the allegory of the old man and the sea, our famous Hemingway reading from high school. If you're a developer or a builder and you're building middle density or mid-rise, you need to start with a very big fish so that when you get back to your village, you've got something left to eat. Mid-rise is starting with a small fish and there's nothing left at the end of the fight. So how do we deal with that? Well, we basically really need as of right entitlements. That means zoning. That beyond zoning means a fast lane for priority projects, and projects you want to see should be easier to process. Let's set our planners free and let them work on tough files rather than the check boxes of something easy. And it means building code for small. Our mid-rise and projects basically have to satisfy high-rise code standards. It would be lovely if we were like Europe and single-stair buildings were allowed and through units. But I'm going to say that in Toronto, they get it. I think that the lane and garden suite policies that were introduced over the last couple of years are very much the right direction. And under Mayor Tory, and especially with Bradford as our new chair of planning committee, and Chief Planner Greg Lintern's work, there's some serious thinking being done at the city, and I'm convinced that some really bold and positive changes are coming forward this spring and summer. I think that the City of Toronto administration is dedicated to putting outcomes and results on the ground, and Toronto will be at the forefront of unlocking barriers to the missing middle. I truly believe that. And the province has set the table as well to take the things that Toronto's going to be doing this year and export them everywhere, the way we just saw California did. And we need that to create the scale for our industry to build into. We need scale. So I think that the provinces work on mandating it everywhere. Their work on putting CLT into the building code last summer. They've requested that the federal government fast track single stair buildings for 6 stories and less. All those things are great moves. So right now I see a lot of very positive momentum. But on the industry side, there's stuff we need to do. There's a saying that the single biggest innovation in construction over the last 50 years was the portable electric rechargeable battery drill. So that's as far as we've made it. So what we need is, with this scaled opportunity, is improvements in factory production, off-site construction, logistics for delivery, investment in technology and capacity in those areas. It means people getting used to repeatable designs and parametric design for manufacturing and assembly, all terms that are pretty foreign to most of our construction industry. Missing middle, small, only gets possible by having repeatable designs and sunk costs you invest up front, amortized over many products. You can't afford to design new every time for a small project. I think that policy and production enhancements are actually coming to a meeting point in the next year. I really truly believe we're about to unlock the opportunity for missing middle housing. And I've noticed a big shift in our market towards intergenerational housing, and people want it and need it and get it. So I see this turning out well. The map has been set out for us in California and in Oregon. I think we're well on the way to emulating it. 23 and 24 should be very good years for this kind of housing. And the promise is not just to make a better community, it's to make more housing. And more housing at scale gets cheaper. And it's going to be net accretive to what the industry can build on an annual basis. Let's say in Toronto, GTA, we do max 30,000 units a year. I think that by unlocking self-solved housing and missing middle and ADUs, we can grow that by 30 or 40%, because you're now creating and building opportunity that the typical industry doesn't address. So we're actually going to grow our capacity. You've all seen my slides before. They're going to circulate them again. I'm going to draw a line there just in case we need some time for questions. And we're off to hear from Bindu.
Thank you, Lee. That was very insightful, and I hear you on setting the planners free. Today, I'm just going to give some perspective on municipal kind of considerations for encouraging this kind of housing. Next slide, please. I'm going to go over a few areas, but then focus on zoning and code. Next slide, please. So it kind of starts from a high level growth management. This is the basis on which many intensification decisions are taken at least Ontario municipalities. And, we are given growth allocations. Forecasting is key. For example, in the region of Peel, where I am, the region allocates certain growth numbers to the local municipalities based on the growth plans. And that kind of takes into account all kinds of housing typologies. So it has to be embedded from there, ideally. And then local municipalities use these numbers, forecast housing typologies to come up with their own assessments, official plan policies, secondary plans. When a builder comes in with an application for a subdivision, these are the targets that we assess against. So it's important to kind of start from there. And of course, policy is key. The the official plans, the plan hierarchy, everything is kind of important that this is embedded in. Sometimes if these documents are not updated regularly, it can be a barrier. What can really help is at a municipal level is having a great housing plan, which gets updated regularly, and then you can kind of track and monitor where the barriers are occurring. Next slide, please. So on the infrastructure piece, this is super critical, at least from our perspective, not just the hard infrastructure needed to accommodate and serve this gentle densification, but all the soft infrastructure needed, to create complete communities. The right side column lists some of the work that goes on and a few considerations. For example, infill capacity analysis. This is one I'd like to talk a little bit more about. I know a lot of municipalities in Ontario are kind of looking at this. If infill is promoted, then cities need to review this capacity in the existing neighborhoods, and then identify what infrastructure investments would be needed to support this infill. And in an evaluation we did in the city of Brampton earlier for gentle infill, we studied 4 neighborhoods just to see how much of an uptake can be accommodated. And each aspect we checked, like everything from schools, transit, parking, everything. And what we realized is that the age of the neighborhood didn't really matter as much. It was more of the state of the current infrastructure, the densities, the in-place amenities. For example, in one area, water and wastewater pipes would not even support a 30% increase in these small units without requiring a major overhaul, which was not planned or budgeted for. In another area, school board said there was not enough school capacity in that area, but in the others, they can kind of make do with boundary changes or adding some portables. So, just a message that we have to capture this in our work at the municipal level, and sometimes not focusing on it can create barriers later on. And of course, there can be creative solutions. I came across Edmonton's infill fire protection program, which is a cost share program, and their infill fire protection assessment, which is done on a site specific basis. So that can work. And there are some solutions that can work. Next slide, please. This one is self-evident. Even the most progressive municipalities and councils need support. It helps if cities regularly and consistently work with the community and every partner that you can find in that municipality, nonprofits, colleges, students, newcomer groups, land trusts, etc. What I found important, and I think I should share, is that it's easy to kind of fight a battle at a large level rather than focus on little nitty-gritty. So for example, if your housing goals for missing middle are connected to a very large vision or issue or a problem that particular community is facing. For example, in Brampton, it was a lack of safe and affordable housing for students, seniors, and newcomers. And so all resident groups, nonprofits got involved in supporting the city in all these conversations around density, housing choices. So I'm just saying, by focusing on the larger conversation and the larger issues, the smaller ones can kind of go better, at least not blow up as much. And of course, the industry is a huge part of the shift. Developers, small builders keep telling municipalities about all the barriers they face and give us ideas. At the town of Caledon, where I am currently, we are planning to leverage a new community builders roundtable and brainstorm our way into this kind of new legislation that is coming out from the province. So those are kind of good things to kind of go forward with. Next slide, please. So when we talk to developers, these are kind of 2 of the biggest barriers: cost and predictability. They come up all the time. And municipalities do create some resources for property owners, developers. There's always work that can be added and done. I came across this example, like what is the role of a municipality in doing this? This one has a fully dedicated team and a website where they give pre-approved plans are kept in there, and all a homeowner needs to do is figure out if through that web tool, whether his lot can accommodate an ADU, and if so, then which out of the 4 options can go in there, and then he just takes them and goes and gets a building permit. So maybe Ontario municipalities can start thinking about that. Next slide, please. Of course, municipalities are always challenged. Capacity and process improvements are ongoing, modernizing, staffing. These are all real kind of issues that we have to face. You wouldn't be surprised as to how many great policies and pilot projects can kind of fall through for lack of, let's say, enforcement staff. So staff that you think are not involved in planning. So, we have to balance the budgets. And I think this is a right time for all municipalities to start collaborating a lot more with either schools, nonprofits, industries. It's been going on, but now we need to kind of really focus on that. Like, what can the city do on its own versus what can it do as part of a big collaborative initiative? Next slide, please. I think zoning is a great tool if used well. We've heard from the other speakers today. It has the power to either lead to great success or, on this revolution, or the opposite. In Ontario, recently, the province released Bill 23, and where they've now allowed, as of right, 3 units on each residential lot in an urban area, which is servicing. They're allowed as of right, meaning no zoning code can preclude the use. And then they have also come up with, requirements for maximum parking, no charges, DCs and all will be charged, no site plan process is needed. But there are many other zoning parameters that could get in the way. And the province is leaving this to each individual municipality. For example, you can still prescribe all these regulations, and some are connected to each other. Some are like dominoes. If you are strict with one, everything else kind of doesn't work, and the garden suite will never fit into your backyard. So we'll have to be super careful with zoning. Not that there is no solution. One can always look and apply for variances, but at the Committee of Adjustment in Ontario, but that's an extra process and doesn't give you surety. So when we work on zoning, there's a few constraints that we cannot get around. And some are like lot constraints, lots which don't have sufficient area or width, resulting in no physical distance between the dwellings to accommodate a detached unit, or a rear or side yard access, which is obstructed, and then the fire code won't allow you to use that. And site constraints, natural heritage features, meeting parking standards sometimes it can be tough, even though they've been reduced drastically. One item that is not in here, I think, on the list is density, and having zoning with densities cannot really be very helpful for missing middle housing if you're not calculating it properly. So in a recent survey that Brampton did for their additional residential units, garden units, people were asked to rank the top 3 zoning bylaw issues that was challenging to comply with. And I think the lot size, location, distance required from the principal dwelling to the garden unit, and the setbacks from the lot line. These are the top 3, at least, that they identified here in Ontario. So there are some good precedents in dealing with density. For example, I think it was Edmonton that replaced density maximums with minimums in zones while controlling the maximum lot coverage. And I think for landscaping requirements for infill developments, Ottawa was proposing like a sliding scale of landscaping requirements, soft landscaping percentage based on your front or side yard setbacks and your dimensions of that yard. Basically, it goes along with the size of the yard. So people can innovate. I'm just saying that these are some of the zoning parameters that are still there in spite of Bill 23 being in place. Next slide, please. Here's a list of other considerations. I'm not calling them barriers, but just things to consider: lot fabric variations in existing areas, in older areas, which have gradually developed over time. You're working on zoning changes to allow this, and then you find like lots are so varied in their sizes. And most of the time, the older bylaws have, even variations in parent zones. I have seen bylaws where like there are thousands of site-specific zones. So if you're trying to change something, you're kind of dealing with a humongous problem. So I think it takes time and effort to kind of fix zoning first in order to allow this. Under Bill 23, the province says no site plan will be required, but they're talking to municipal staff, I feel that there would still be a need for an engineering review to confirm the site grading and drainage. There could be need for parking management plans now all of a sudden. There are some charges that the province has removed, but I think it's not gone to the extent that it's needed. For example, education charges could still be required, is what we're trying to understand. And then if they're heritage districts. So a lot of issues that at a municipal level, you kind of got to figure out as to how best to reduce these barriers and support this initiative. Next slide, please. And the building code is, of course, an important, sorry, I think there was a slide on the building code. If you can go back to one slide. Yeah, please. No, yes, thank you. In Ontario, there are some issues when you're applying for a code that you need to get permission from another level of government. For example, the regions approve our new connections or servicing. So building permits cannot be issued until that check is complete. Loft units need separate access, which is not easy. For 2 basement units, the code does not specify 2 separate entrances. You've got issues around floodplain and mitigation measures when you're outside the floodplain, fire access to backyard units. So there are some things that, you know, the code kind of has in there that still need to be looked at. You know, recent code changes have been really helpful, and they're still ongoing is what I understand. So earlier, a homeowner could not immediately convert their new home basement to a legal unit at the same cost. That's now changed. So, you know, it costs the same, and you don't need any extra stuff in there. But the code does leave some aspects to interpretation. So, for example, for 2 basement apartments, the code does not specify 2 separate entrances, or it's not very clear yet. So there are still things that need to be looked at. Next slide, please. Here's an idea for, you know, how a city can go about scanning for the allowance of these units in their existing areas. Opticos prepared this. It's called a neighborhood city scan. It's super easy. Like we just have to scan, look at each neighborhood on a case-by-case basis, or look at the entire city, for example, scan for access, zoning, transit, connectivity, infrastructure capacity, and you know, need for upgrades, but also look at the existing lot sizes in the neighborhoods. Lot width is critical. When you know, lot width kind of gives you an idea of what typical mixing middle types can fit on the lot. So it's called a lot width analysis, where you look at, you know, what is the predominant lot sizes in that neighborhood and what can really fit into it. And of course, you know, the degree of connectivity and walkability within neighborhoods is key for the viability of these types, as we know. So for example, in town of Caledon, for example, which is now starting on its growth journey with not a lot of transit there, which is not even frequent. It's difficult to kind of push for this when you know that it's not going to be available till the buildup happens and the growth happens for a little bit more. So there are ways we can work around that. Next slide, please. For new subdivisions, there are some ideas floating around where you have, you know, and they're expanding into greenfield areas. So is there a way that municipalities can ask for the new housing to deliver this right from the start, right from the planning stage? It's a new brand new neighborhood coming up in vacant land. And so code experts said, yes, there are certain elements of the housing construction that can make it very easy for the new homeowner to legalize this once they purchase the house. So the builder can either give them a ready legal unit, or the homeowner can easily, you know, fulfill these, you know, code requirements that the builder has already given them, and just apply and work on a little bit more and just apply for a permit. So these are things that the code says you should have in mind if you want your future unit to be rough and ready for a legal unit. And it's time maybe the developers can start looking at it, saying, okay, let's include this in our new planning in areas that are not infill areas, for example.
I think we should wrap up here.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks.
This has been fabulous. This is a incredible list of things we need to move forward
Yes.
on. And thank you to all the panelists. We have I have so many questions for you, that so many things I'd love to jump into. I just want to start with a quick follow-up that comes off of Bindu's presentation. And I, you know, noticed that she commented that the municipalities were responsible still for lot coverage and lot size regulations, setbacks, that the province has done a lot of reforms, but a lot is left up to the municipalities. And we've heard from Denise and Eli that there's first generation reforms and second generation reforms. And I'm wondering what you think about, you know, that list of things left on the table, and are those deal breakers that need to be addressed? Setbacks, lot coverage, and size.
I can start on that, but Denise probably will have more from, I think that codes often start off saying you just have to allow ADUs and that's all you do. And then some jurisdictions do it and some jurisdictions figure out how to thwart them through various creative ways. And then the state or the city comes back, usually the state, to say, okay, you're not allowed to require parking mandates. You're not allowed to require owner occupancy. You're not allowed to have any more strict rules on a house with ADU than you would on just having a house on a lot. And maybe I should hand over to Denise to share some of the examples of that from California, but there's an iterative thing. You don't have to go through every iteration because a lot of lessons have already been learned from other places. But that's the way I think of it.
Yeah, and let me just emphasize, you have on this call the thread that created California's ADU law. It started with Eli in Oregon and Karen's research and their universities. Jake Wegman joined when he did his research. I read all their work and figured out how to design the California law, which was then followed by 6 more laws. So learn from this thread, right? You read the history, and every time we do it, we get better. And back to Karen's question, zoning barrier, when I lobbied this bill, like their zoning barriers look like this. If you get rid of parking, there's still a wall. If you get rid of lot size, there's still a wall. Portland removed these barriers one at a time. And what they found was getting rid of one barrier makes no difference because the wall is still there. So from a zoning standpoint, they all need to go away. And that means all the zoning barriers, all the ones Karen has identified that are in my slideshow as things we got rid of, they all got to go. Once you see them gone though, the work is not over. And then you see these second generation barriers that are really, in our experience, an artifact of all the systems we have around us of financing, regulating, building, connecting to utilities that were envisioned during a time when all you could do was a single family house because all this other stuff was essentially illegal. And by the way, California had the Second Unit Enabling Act on its books since the late 80s. And I'm old now, but when I was a young current planning chief, I wrote Marin County's ADU law to make sure we couldn't have any ADUs. That was my charge in spite of the name of the state law. So when I rewrote the state law, we just tweaked the name and added a notwithstanding all the things locals can do to stop this, thou shalt allow this by building permit, period. And that was the transformational change. So then we got to financing. Nobody knows what this is. Nobody trusts government. Development's hard. It's expensive. You can't do it one city at a time because you can't build a modular industry for San Francisco or for Portland. You need to get 450 cities where builders can build 2 or 3 units a year in every city for them to get to scale, to have a factory to build units in that can be deployed to backyards and bring the costs down from $450,000 a door, which I understand is the site-built cost in Oregon, and is pretty much what we saw in California as the site-built cost for ADUs, to $100,000 a door when you're buying a less expensive ADU that's been standardized on a pre-approved plan that people crank out or is factory built. So in order to get to the second gen, and then you got to deal with stuff like, oh, appraisers don't know how to appraise these. So you got to work with the appraisers. Oh, the multiple listing service for the realtors doesn't track ADUs. How do you get a comp for an ADU when you're sizing a mortgage if no one tracks ADUs and there's no data? So you got to fix those problems in order to get to finance at scale. So a lot of these second generation barriers are the work of the Casita Coalition. And our builders bring them to us every day. Some utilities are requiring 2 meters.
Thank you so much. I'm getting told we're at time, and we see Richard coming back on. So we're going to have to end it here. Could talk to you guys all day. Thank you so much for your participation.
It's never good news when you see me come back on. I don't know whose idea it was to make this only 1 hour. I hope it wasn't mine. It probably was, but we should have given ourselves a lot more time. But I really want to thank Karen, Eli, oops, I just lost my names here. Bindu, Leith and Denise for, wow, that was like catnip to any of us policy wonks. That was incredible. Good news is for our audience is that there's more conversation yet to unfold. We have 2 more sessions tomorrow and on Thursday. Please stay tuned because we're going to continue building on the themes that we've been building up over the last 2 days. So we look forward to seeing you then. And if I could get you to go to the next slide. We also have a very special treat, a book launch, Remaking the American Dream, on February the 9th. That's this Thursday at the World Urban Pavilion and on Dundas Street in Regent Park. You will see that the link is in the chat, but a great way to end an amazing week. So more to come. Thank you, panel. Thank you, audience. Unbelievable attendance. We'll see you tomorrow.